All right. We are at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I see people still streaming in as we go, but I say let's kick this thing off and get into the agenda and some introductions. And as we do that, we'll give people time to filter in. So uh, thanks to everybody on the line right now. Appreciate you joining us. I am very, very lucky to be joined by some esteemed panelists from some phenomenal organizations, and we are going to have a conversation today. That's what this is about. This is about having a conversation. Um, Formally, though, we're going to kick it off with everyone's going to go around and do some introductions, introduce themselves. We will start the conversation about a real high level macro discussion on auditors and accountants and technology. Um, from there, we'll get a little bit more tactical with things and we'll start talking about this concept of the audit technology stack or the modern audit tech stack. Uh, Baker Tilly will walk us through a bit of a case study of how they're thinking of piecing this tech stack together in a very practical sense. We will get our eyes on the product, and you'll see a very high level integration demo of Suralink, Validus, and Trulian. And we'll probably end things with a little bit. We'll take the crystal ball out and we'll do some predictions and looking ahead as it relates to accountants and auditors and technology. And hopefully we're going to have time for Q&A. It is my responsibility, I suppose, as the moderator here to keep us on the rails, to keep us within the designated time frame, and to ensure that we do have time for questions at the end. So you have my commitment that I'll do my best that I possibly can. So with that, before we get into introductions, quick housekeeping item. This webinar is being recorded. We're going to send follow-ups within 24 to 48 hours from the webinar. Q&A is encouraged throughout the session, so ask away. I think that what that means is questions get put in the chat or through the Q&A function on Zoom. And like I said, we'll make sure we have time at the end to address as many questions as possible as we can. Okay. So with that, I'm not on this slide, so I'll kick us off because I'm not on this slide, but really nice to see all the panelists here, as well as to meet all the participants that are on the line. My name is Scott. I am the Vice President of Alliances at Trulian. That means I manage our partnerships and our relationships with accounting firms, with accounting advisory firms, as well as other technologies that Trulian integrates with. And I will pass it over. We'll just start with Jeff.
Thank you, Scott, and hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Gramlich. I'm Managing Director for Validus. I've been with Validus since the beginning. I'm also a shareholder. I have 40 plus years experience in this space. Former auditor, tax professional for Ernst & Young way back when it was Arthur Young, so a long time ago. I'm excited to be here today with my colleagues and talk through kind of what we're doing and talk about the solution stack for auditors and where we see things going.
I can go. Hey, everyone. Jordan Sklar here, solutions consultant with Scott at Trulian. I've been at Trulian about 2 years now. Prior to, I spent over 6 at Grant Thornton in their finance transformation practice. Super excited to be here with all these guys and with all of you. So thank you for joining.
I can go next. My name is Jeremy Smith. I'm the CTO at Suralink. Have been here for a little over about 4 years. Have had an amazing experience sort of servicing the industry over 25 years, sort of building software and software as a service tools and solutions for a variety of different industries, but super happy to be here today.
And based on the squares, I am square number 4. So I'm Kevin Fulser. I am a senior manager at Baker Tilly. I've been at Baker Tilly for about 13 years or so. I was an auditor in the manufacturing distribution space with life science and biotech for about 10 of those. I was always involved with assurance tech during that time to varying degrees. made that a little bit more formal within the last 3 years. And so now primarily I work with all assurance tech, all the new tech that's coming in, testing out and trying to evaluate all of the many options that are out there and trying to choose the best things for us and get our auditors trained and ready to go on some of this new technology. Another important element of what I do is I work with the Dynamic Audit Solutions project, which is part of the AICPA as well. So I spend a good amount of time working with that. So that's my intro. Back to Scott.
Amazing. Thank you all. And let's get into the conversation around auditors and technology. I'm going to maybe start with Jeff because I think over the last, we'll call it 30 years, you've been on every side of this. You've been an accountant. You've built technology products for accountants. You've sold technology products to accountants. You've consulted with firms about the use of tech. So with that perspective on many different sides, how would you describe the relationship between accountants and auditors and technology?
That's a great question, Scott. And so we'll take a little bit step back maybe, or a historical step, and then bring us up to current times really quick. I would say since, auditing came into being in 1934, so about 90 years ago, with the Securities and Exchange Act requiring it for publicly held companies, there was a good number of those years where not much happened. There wasn't much of an intersection between auditors and technology. I mean, there were mainframe routines done in the 60s and 70s and some things like that, but it was still a very manual process. And that even transpires even in today. And it's been very much top down, meaning the most sophisticated clients and the most sophisticated audits got all of the technology and the attention, kind of early on and in the period. But still very manual. I talk to auditors all over the world, even today, still doing a lot of manual processes. What we have seen on the encouraging side is certainly in the last 10 years, more cloud-based audit technologies and tools than we've ever seen before. So audit was one of the disciplines within a firm that didn't necessarily, until we had things like Sarbanes-Oxley and PCAOB, we didn't necessarily have a statutory requirement to use technology to accomplish this. We might have done it for efficiencies and other reasons, but if I compared that to tax returns and other disciplines, there was a requirement that forced the profession to change and adopt technology like immediately in some cases. In this case, we see it now as just a big efficiency gain and improvement on quality. And I hope to get more into that. So I think what we've seen historically, and you look over the last 90 years, a big portion of that time has been with manual processes. And when things did get automated, it was kind of paving the cow path. So, I mean, one of the greatest excitements around technology was when really we got off of Lotus and came to Excel, and I could write my own macros and put things down and across. And I can remember colleagues and partners, well, how do you know it's accurate? Are you kidding me? We're talking about footing down and across in a spreadsheet. It's accurate every time. It knows, it doesn't know how to be inaccurate. So, but that was a big deal. And every auditor uses Excel even today. And there's just a lot of flexibility in a spreadsheet format, which tells you how old some of our thinking is, Scott, and how we do that. So we'll get into more of the details as we go through it. But I think what we're seeing in the last, like I said, 10 years, or certainly the last 5 years, is an explosion of tools and best of breed type solutions geared specifically for the audit and the audit discipline within the firm and how to get the most out of that.
And Kevin, maybe you can pull on that last thread there. Like you mentioned being at Baker Tilly for, I think, 13 years. And so over the past decade in particular, like what are some of the major shifts you've seen in the firm's thinking as it relates to technology?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that I've noticed is that, when I started up, a lot of the the general moves that were done in software is trying to select a software solution that's to sort of do the whole dance, do everything, right? Trying to get as much in one place as possible. I think this was done for several reasons. And in many ways, it was, an item of convenience, right? Be able to kind of, consolidate all your eggs in that one basket. And the challenge that we were always faced with was we had a tool, and that was great, but we were often left with, well, two problems. One, there's a tool over here that does this better. Why aren't we using it, right? Like, especially more recently, and especially in today's, within the last couple of years, we say to ourselves, look at these tools that are out here. How are we not utilizing some of this technology and the availability of this technology? So that's one of the challenges. And then the other challenge was when you're using the tool, you would notice to yourself, like, this is a lot weaker, right, on this part of it. This might be strong, this element of it, but they certainly had challenges with the whole, it was not the that jack of all trades comment that comes up all the time, right? And so from that perspective, you found yourself a little bit lacking in the end to end. There were elements that were just challenging to get through, and you just kind of got through them. So I think one of the big things that I've been pleasantly surprised with the industry, and specifically with our firm, is that we've been working to try to change that mindset a bit and say that, it doesn't necessarily have to be the end-to-end solution that we're looking at. We're trying to attack and say, okay, there are opportunities to get into, these different technologies that are out there. And again, hitting on what I think the main thing is, for my opinion, is thinking about integrations, right? Once we started being able to integrate these things, that sort of changed and helped to shift that mindset a bit, from why can't, if we have lots of great technologies, we can't connect them. That was always one of the things that was a stumbling block. Well, that doesn't really apply as much anymore. And so that's one of the big things that I've been very happy with myself, to try to move some of this technology forward.
Yep. And that's that whole concept of sort of legacy all in one versus best of breed, more integrated solutions that we're going to dive a lot deeper into later in the conversation. I wouldn't be able to have a conversation though about auditors and technology in, what are we, in September of 2024, without talking about AI. And so if you humor me for a second, KPMG came out with this very interesting report a couple months ago, that showed 82% of companies believe their auditors are ahead of them or equal with them in the adoption of AI for financial analysis. And I think further it went on to say that 2/3 of the clients, the enterprises that were interviewed in this, want and expect their auditors to prioritize using AI in the course of audits. And so maybe I'll go to Jordan as somebody who spends a vast majority of his time demoing and solutioning an AI technology with firms. What are you hearing today in terms of what's really important? Like, how are firms starting to think about the use of AI in the course of an audit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's a number of different procedures where you could point to, whether it is a test of details test and leveraging an OCR engine for data recognition and data matching, or whether it's a large file that you're looking to summarize and slash time and efficiency on, or perform analytical procedures or calculations. Those are just some of the few that we're hearing. But from a lot of the firms that we speak with, they all are looking to integrate AI tools in their tech stack, and there's numbers of dozens of different use cases that we're seeing with new ones popping up every day. And Kevin and I discuss this a lot together as well.
I think
Jeremy,
one of the
I
things
think,
that I was
yeah,
going to mention here
please.
too, that I'll jump in here, and I'll become the moderator here, Scott, for a second.
I love it.
That's right. So I think that what I found, from the client perspective, is the clients almost rely on the auditor in some cases to bring this stuff to the table. They feel like, I feel like that a lot of these companies, these mid-market companies that are out there, they don't have the time, the energy, or the resources to go out and like delve into all this type of technology. They're interested, but they sort of rely on when the auditor comes in that, okay, this is the time they want to talk about it. And many times during the meetings that we have with our client, they're much more interested in talking about these topics than sometimes even the financial statements themselves. And so we find that on a regular basis. So I totally agree that, they're in many ways hoping their auditors have this information to bring to bear.
And I would be sort of remiss to not try and pull some insight from Jeremy as a technologist, and someone that's building technology and presumably as well regularly having feedback loops with the clients that are using your technology. How are you guys thinking about AI, whether it is in the course of like building and using the product, or what you're hearing in terms of feedback from the firms in terms of what they're looking for?
Yeah, I would just underline some of what Kevin and Jordan were talking about. Like when we work with, as we work with firms and with our clients, we often hear, that is that when an auditor comes in, or when a firm comes in to perform a service of sort of any stripe, a lot of what they're getting hit with is like, hey, how would we use this to make our lives better? So you're getting it from sort of both sides. Everybody wants to sort of drive that efficiency, and extend their reach and capabilities, whether that's the clients that the industry serves or the industry itself. And I think that those are two really important aspects of when we're going to build, when we think about building solutions, you want to think about the whole picture. You want to think about how to leverage these technologies in a way that makes sense, and frankly, that allows people to sleep at night with the answer. So whether that's a little bit of an additional focus around compliance or security, but you need to be able to introduce these tools in a way that that extend people's capabilities, but they're able to live with the results as well.
And when you talk about people either being able to sleep at night or not, right? That's kind of rooted in fear, and uncertainty. And Jeff, I know when we were having this conversation a couple weeks ago, you had some interesting take on accountants just as a group of people who characteristically are maybe a little more risk averse than the general population. And so we'll kind of tie up here before we get into the next topic, but anything as it relates to, obviously AI is presenting incredible opportunity and transformational opportunity for organizations, right? Both firms and for their clients. But there's also a lot of unknown. We're in the early innings of this. So what are you hearing about that balance of like opportunity, but then a little bit of hesitation?
That's a great question. I think, and let's just kind of categorize this, that it's really become a thing in the last call it 2 years, and we're seeing more acceptance of it. I have a saying that accounting firms have two kinds of years in my 40 plus years: good and really good. So if there's not some other compelling reason to change, they won't. And Kevin mentioned how he's trying to piece these pieces together and start to use point solutions instead of maybe buying from a suite. And I think we'll get into that a little bit. But yes, they should be ahead of their clients, but this does not mean they're ahead relative to other industries. When you think through the ability for AI and machine learning to really help advance their processes and deliver higher quality and work on other things for their client. Frequently, an auditor will know the financial statements, maybe not the dynamics of what created them, but know the financials and be able to analyze them better than a lot of their clients do in the first place. So do they want AI on top of that to help with it? Yeah, of course. So it's no surprise this statistic is this high, but the output at some level is only as good as the input. And we know that the innovation really happens when data starts to flow, and this depth and breadth of the data, is pretty paramount, which is as what we focus on. So I believe that the profession is moving, is starting to accept it. But if you just rolled this back to even earlier in the year, Scott, and you said AI in one of your conversations, it was almost like, well, that's a black box. I don't understand it. I don't have to understand it, and I don't want to understand it. I'll move on or do what I did last year. because everybody loves Sally in this space, as auditors, and they don't like change necessarily unless they get really comfortable with it, and we're starting to see that now.
Well, I think we can say that we checked the AI checkbox in this conversation, and it's good. As I mentioned before, we're in the extremely early innings with AI and AI adoption and how people are thinking about it. But if we actually let's go back to another technological mega trend, which is like the shift to cloud and cloud based. And I think that tees up the conversation that we want to have on understanding this emerging sort of modern audit tech stack that exists. And to be able to have a tech stack, you need to have different categories of technologies. And in preparation for this webinar, that us as a group, we heavily debated these different categories and subcategories that can and should and do exist. And I think a lot of our conversation was informed by Kevin and Baker Tilly is you guys have gone through a bit of this exercise internally, right? In the Baker Tilly Global and trying to categorize the different vendors that you work with. And so, Kevin, maybe you can take a stab and give us like the 30,000-foot view of what we are now defining as this audit tech stack in the various categories that exist here.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think that the only thing that I wanted to comment on, just to give us some context to the challenge that I think a lot of auditors face here, is that we, a year, even 2 years before this, one of the things that we were attempting to do is, or I was first looking at and saying, okay, we have first of all, what technology are we using? I would argue that many firms can barely answer that question, right? So what technology do we even have? And then once they identify those things, what does it do and what categories of these things are? And so that's what led to sort of this initiative within our firm in the US and then further in the global. So that's sort of the context of what was happening here. Is it's critical to just understand these technologies before you can even go further and pursue others, because otherwise, you're potentially duplicating services, your costs, etc. You get the idea. And so the ones that we have here, these were heavily debated, and we can continue to debate them. But what pretty much everyone agrees upon, across the board, is you have to get the data, right? It needs to be collected in some way, collected, cleaned, prepped, right? There's all sorts of focus on those. There's acquisitions this year focusing on just that, right? And so I think it's important that first category there is a really big one. It's really hot, lots of talk on those things. And there are many options in that category. But nonetheless, everyone agrees that data has to come in. We can talk about that more. The other two in the middle here, everyone else agrees that these are pretty strong categories, right? The first one is going to be the workflow management, right? So we have, Suralink sitting in here, but the workflow management, pretty much everyone agrees that at some level, we need to collect and organize in an audit. There's lots of pieces of stuff, items, things like that are coming in from very disparate sources. Sometimes we need to collect, organize, manage, and make it look like we know what we're doing, right? From an audit perspective. So we need to make sure we organize these things. So just being able to manage that workflow is critical. A variety of tools there. The one on the other side, again, an extremely hot topic, which is just going to be the analytics, the automation. This one gets a lot of focus because there are sometimes, there are so many tools that are out there that'll sit there and do analytics and things like that, and the challenge that we're faced with as an auditor is we get inundated with all these different types of analytical tools and automation tools. And it's very challenging for us to come up with, first of all, which ones are best. And second of all, what do we do with some of this stuff? So that's going to be, how do we take credit for it as an industry and actually make reasonable choices that get audit evidence, audit credit? That's really challenging. And so those are three categories that we generally agree are kind of part of that tech stack. And then that top one is going to be the last part of it. There's a heavy emphasis once we're done with all of this stuff. You got the data, you've organized it, you've analyzed it, right? That type of thing. Now, what is it for the many ways the client? What is the deliverable, right? It's the reporting. And that gets heavy emphasis, obviously, throughout an audit. And from that perspective, the tools and everything that get into that, it all kind of feeds into the ultimate output of the reporting. How do we make sure that, you know, the information that we're presenting to the client is accurate? We're not missing anything. It's not misleading, right? Or the client, that type of thing. So that's why it's important that that last category here, perhaps the one that has the most room for discussion, but ultimately it is that last phase of the audit, right? And that's what the client relies on, gets a tremendous focus as ultimately all these parts of the audit and technology solutions that are related to that. So that's my kind of high level of the different categories on here. I'll leave it open to the rest. Jeff, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just think, Kevin, even in your firm, wouldn't you say even in that reporting box,
Yep.
you still heavily rely on Excel and Word, just old tools that work?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into too much detail, the answer
Sure.
is many firms use Excel and Word. We use other tools as well, right? But the challenge that we have, Jeff, is that many of those tools are part of end-to-end solutions too, right? And so, you
Right.
know, they're the traditional end-to-end and they're the last end of that solution. So they
Right.
have they're part of that, and whether they're the best in breed or not is certainly debatable. And certainly an Excel Word carrying, you can't make the argument that that is a best in breed, you know, solution either, or a long-term solution. But there are plenty of firms that that is the option for them. There's nothing wrong with that option. It's just that, you know, from the perspective of what we talked about up front, we do need to think about challenging ourselves and realizing that, does that really, you know, what are we, with the tools and technology we have available and the information we have available, how we can prep some of this stuff and get these better, and the time we spend in this area, there has to be ways to focus on that element of it and start to move the needle forward. But you're absolutely right. There is plenty of, we'll call it a little bit more of old school thinking in the reporting side of things.
And we've been kind of circling around now this reference to end-to-end solutions or all-in-one solutions. Um, and Jeff, I actually think you've had experience working for a few of these companies that have historically been in the like end-to-end solution
Right.
space,
Right.
or the all-in-one solution. And so, I mean, from your view now, like having been in it all in one, and then now with Validus is what I would consider to be a best in breed solution, meaning that it is focused on one part, one specific part of this tech stack and data collection and preparation, but doing it better than anybody else, right? So like focusing on one thing and doing it extremely well and integrating with the rest of the ecosystem. But as you think about it, what are some of the advantages and I guess disadvantages of being an all-in-one solution?
You know, so I think you know, first, there's a lot of good players out there, and you guys know the names, whether it's Wolters Kluwer, Thomson Reuters, Caseware. We know a lot of the end-to-end products and many others that are good tools and focus on different areas. I think when you get to the point solutions, and Kevin alluded to it just a little bit, you really have to look at, okay, what is their focus? What is best of breed, and how does that actually move my needle? I think we talked a little bit, Scott, in preparation of, and I know we'll get into this, what are some of the categories for building the tech stack, and what should the practitioners be looking for? But when we start to talk about this, it really boils down to, are we moving towards a data-driven audit and really thinking through broader what we need to do? Do we need to just continue to grab a sample of the client's data and continue the sampling process we've always done and just leave everything alone, and anything that automates the old process, that's what we're most interested in? Or do we need to bring in all of the data, the relevant data, and look at the data holistically and say, you know what, we're going to let this drive some of the procedures and some of the outputs that will help with both the workflow management, the automation and analysis, and fundamentally the end part, the reporting. So we have that ability now with cloud solutions, cloud ERP systems, and some of the sophistications allow these things to be done. 20 years ago, you couldn't get to the data. So that was a moot point. You can't get to it, so don't try it. But now we can, and we do. And we see these partnerships and these ecosystems evolving, where we can not only improve quality, but also improve the efficiency through all of this stack that Kevin's talking about.
I think that's right. And I think we can and should continue to debate like the categories and the subcategories that make up an audit tech stack. And this will continue to evolve because the market's moving quickly. I think historically, accountants and auditors have been a bit of an underserved market by software vendors and software providers. And that's changed a lot in the last few years. There's more and more people coming into this market. What I think everybody who's on the line, all of the participants should be clear-eyed on, whatever the various categories are, if you want to build a modern audit tech stack, what are the characteristics that you should be looking for from the vendors that you're going to be working with? And so I'll put what we've kind of aligned on is 3 really important characteristics out there, and I'll let whoever they want react to that. I think the first one is cloud-based, right? We're moving to it's time. We're moving to a world that is more data-driven, more integrated, more cloud-based. To that point, cloud-based being one, open APIs, connected and integrated solutions where data can flow seamlessly from one tool to another would be another really important attribute. And the last piece would be innovation oriented, right? That's the thing of sort of comparing some of the end-to-end or all-in-one solutions versus some of the more modern solutions is this real focus on continuing to push the envelope on product development and integration and what can be done in this space. So I would say cloud-based, open APIs, and innovation oriented. I'll put it out there if anybody wants to debate or discuss further.
Yep, I'll let some of the others talk about the first two, but I think the main one that I want to comment on is, as you had talked about, Scott, for kind of the shift that I've seen. One of the things that I think is important and something that I'm trying to help drive as well is focusing on that last element, which is that innovation side of things. I think that it's important historically when software or solutions or things that have been evaluated, oftentimes it's what do we have now, right? What can you show me today, right? That's and that's because that's very tangible. They can look at it and they say this is what we're going to evaluate. But the challenge I feel like is not necessarily looking at that, but looking at what they can do later, right? What can be built from this? And that goes back to the first 2 points, right? Cloud, API, etc. But looking at where they can go, right? Because to assume that solutions that you're selecting today will be even exactly the same as they are in a year or 2 years from now probably isn't a safe assumption. And if it is, that's something you should be evaluating yourself and thinking, is this something that is appropriate, right? If it's going to be the same in 2 years, where are we against the market, right? You know what I mean? So it's important, I think, and it's been a very strategic shift to think about things that, to think about companies and who you're working with and their ability to innovate, their ability to be nimble, right? Is I think a difference and a change, right? Accountants aren't always known as being nimble in many ways. And so that's something that we're trying to work on to move that forward and reflect that in choices that we make.
Yeah, I'll just double click on that a little bit. And, I think that on the innovation front, Kevin's exactly right. I think one of the keys for any business is picking the right partners to help you execute the vision that you have moving forward. It's kind of the grand bargain of SaaS, of all software as a service offerings, right? Is you're delivering value, but you're going to help improve that value you're going to increase that value over time by companies investing, by these technology providers investing in their solutions, to provide better and better experiences. And, back to the second point, opening up those experiences so that they can be, you can truly put together best of breed end-to-end solutions by using the best of breed tools that are offered in the market and in the space itself. So I think that, from an open, on the open API front, I think it's absolutely crucial for technology vendors to not only participate in sort of collectives like these and having these solutions available, but it's also imperative for firms to sort of make sure that validate that you can get the data where you need it to be to do the things you need to do with it.
just to tag on to what Jeremy says, when we're going through our process of picking partners, in this case here, Suralink and Trulian, we want partners that are innovating and need something that they don't necessarily want to build. So to state it differently, building everything is a thing of the past now. Building the best of what you do is a thing of the present, and that means you're not going to ever get to everything all the time. So when we pick partners, do we do some diligence? You bet we do. Do we want them to help us and come up with some creative ideas of how to collectively make a solution better? You bet we do. And do we want to use the voice of the customer, in this case, Kevin on the phone, to give us a lot of input? So how well do they know their customers, and what do their customers think of them when we're doing our diligence on who to integrate with and who to have? So we know that Jeremy's team can and the Trillion team can take our data from our APIs. They know exactly what to look for. They know how to move into a sandbox and start implementing in short order. And that's the way we've made it. And that's the way we want it. So we want to be very open. We want to collect that data and prep it correctly and focus on that, and then utilize it across numerous solutions. So again, for that, we just believe that that's when innovation really happens, is when this data flows and you can get across like minds. We can give you the depth and breadth and really focus on the quality of that data that we provide, to support the stack. I know we even debated, is that on the top or the bottom? And I think the way this is going, Scott, is good, that it's just kind of foundational. It's a building block.
That's right. I think that's well said and well stated across the board. I'll give Kevin a lot of credit for having vision and pushing the envelope on innovation. I mean, when you first sat down with Trillian and what our product looked like then versus what it looks like today is a world of difference. And to be honest, you helped push the three of us on the phone between Suralink, Validus, and Trillian to work more closely together and to really think more deeply about an integrated ecosystem and the value that that's going to have to the customer. And we're continuing to do that. So I think with that, it's a good shift to kind of turn it over to Kevin, just to share a little bit, like peel back the layers, or what's the bad? I don't know, got to untake the curtain, open the kimono, some one of these things that people say. But give us a little bit of insight into how you thought about, shifting the mindset of I'm just going to buy one solution that kind of does everything to I'm going to think about actually building a stack and get it working with multiple technologies and pushing the innovation agenda and getting them to work with one another.
Yeah, I think so. I appreciate that. I'll try to be as succinct as possible with the time. I think that one of the things I wanted to comment on that was just said was, for years as an auditor, what I struggled with was there's lots of, we'll say, feedback, right? There's a lot of auditors that have a lot of thoughts about different software that they're using, right? And what I tried to do, during my career was try and filter this back to vendors, right? And say to them, okay, we really do have some stuff here that we can try and do. And over a long period of time, I struggled with getting actionable results for many years, especially with some of these end-to-end type solutions in some cases, not necessarily exclusively, but that was something that was a bit of a struggle, right? You had a lot of great ideas or thoughts on things that could be improved, or even small things that would make our lives a lot better, but we struggled to actually get those implemented, right? And so now, coming forward many years into the future, when I think about evaluating software, right, and I think about what we have and what we're going to have in the future, I do put a good amount of value on that. And the reason is because of some of that experience, right? Is that if you talk to a vendor and you tell them about some of the challenges or try to come up with solutions with that vendor and you're willing to do it, and the best case scenario is they listen to you, then that is something you have to evaluate and consider as part of the evaluation. For years, or for certain firms and for us in some many ways, I don't know how much that was discussed or evaluated as part of these softwares, right? It was more about like what they brought to the table today. What was the solution that they had, rather than thinking about what they can do, as you heard me say earlier. So the thing that, kind of getting back to Scott, what you were saying is, as I mentioned before, a lot of what this is for many firms and for us too, was understanding what we even had, right? Like, what do we have today? That is a crucial challenge for many firms, especially on the larger end, on the mid to larger end for the Baker Tilly side. There's a lot of software that we have out there. And just trying to categorize and understand what you have and what you don't have, that alone is a tremendous step for your firm. Cost savings, efficiency, and then just thinking about where you can go. Because as soon as you start to do that, then you can free yourself up to say, well, what's in the market? Because otherwise, if you're just looking for items in the market, you're already behind, right? You're already saying to yourself, well, all right, I have this out here. Now, how do I even know who to talk to? That's what I found for years. Is I struggled with saying to myself, if there's a new product out there, now who is using what and why, right? Is there somebody that's already doing this out there, right? And so that's why I think it's very important to get the pre-work done. And then you can start to say to yourself, as you talked about with the tech stack and things like that and categorization, then you can say to yourself, okay, what do we need and what could really benefit us in these areas that we're trying to focus on in the audit? You know where you're weak, you know where you're strong, and you can think about improving certain ones. You can say to yourself things like, for example, oh, we have a vendor over here in, let's say, the analytics. It would be great. This is a really strong vendor. It would be great if that vendor would do this, that, and the other thing, right? And you can try and work with that vendor. Working with certain people was something that happened in this case, right? I don't necessarily know up front who's going to be the best at certain areas, but what I do know is that the way that they work with audit firms is critical, right? When you come to the table and you start to think like, what can we do? Can we build solutions that work together, right? To do whatever the problems are. Those, I put a lot of value on that. And I don't, whether each firm has the same thoughts is certainly debatable. But what I think is critical is that they're willing to work with the firms, and that is pretty heavily weighted on some of that past experience, right? That's why when we get into things like, for example, as you talked about, like the cloud integration, it's very clear that we can't continue to do what we're doing today. There's, tons of articles, webinars, etc. on that topic. But the biggest one that we see is that cloud integration, right? The sooner that we can get what we do into the cloud, right? That's where we can start to integrate much more rapidly. We always are under the problem, we're under the challenge right now. We have varieties of tools that sit there and they don't like to integrate with anything, right? That's where we run into problems, because then we have a tool that sort of sits stagnant, right? And they're sometimes hard to move on, right? It takes time. And so that's why, in terms of this solution, or some of the vendors that are here, these are vendors that all were interested in what I just described, right? In terms of coming to the table with these solutions, working with us, focusing on those cloud-based solutions and integrating, right? We'll get into an example here in a second, but I think those were some of the things that we valued in the evaluation process. And the other element just to be aware of, right, in terms of thinking about how this works, and to assume that this was the only vendors that we looked at is not a safe assumption either, right? We get information from vendors weekly, right, on different products that are out there here and there, and that type of thing. And the key part of it is thinking about what is again bringing us back to what I talked about up front, which is, what do you have? What are you looking for, right? And that's where you can start to say, okay, that vendor has something that might be interested in me. Then I can focus on that, and I can go after and consider where they're going, right? And start to move forward. The problem is a lot of firms, including us, until more recently, didn't know that answer. We weren't able to say even what we have and where we want to go. And so that's why I think that changed a lot of the mindset, and then freed us up to be a little bit more aggressive on where we move and how we move going forward. So that was a good amount of talk. Feel free for the rest of the group to jump in. Scott, if you had any other comments there, but I can continue if you want to.
I feel that there were a lot of gems in there on philosophy and approach and how firms can and should be thinking about this um, at like a very high level and then also a very practical level. And if we could continue to zoom in to more of a practical application, I'll probably turn it here, and we're going to focus specifically on, you talked about shifting some workloads or some procedures to the cloud, and how you guys are now venturing on this end automating the end-to-end test of details process in the cloud.
Yep, I think that's great. I think this will move into our example here, but I think that the main thing for folks to be aware of on the call is sort of for this particular example to kind of work through what's happening and some of the vendors on this call, what this process is in terms of where this is now and going forward in the future. This is everything that's on here is some really important and very hot stuff in the audit world right now. Like each of these things that we're going to talk about as a high level here are critical elements. There's lots of players that are happening that are trying to focus on these, but as a high level basis, the main things that I find, from an auditor perspective that we struggle with is we have lots of stuff that we collect from our clients, right? It comes in from them and then it's out there in the world. And in many cases, for years, we just sort of like download it and collect it. We would literally put it in a different spot, right? We take it and we move it somewhere else, and then we potentially move it another time, right? And so we'd have all this stuff out there, that we would have. And so that was the first challenge, is dealing with the volume of stuff that they bring in. Then it's also this data. We have lots of data, and you heard me say it earlier, is just because you have lots of data, you have to be able to apply the data to do something, right? To take credit for the audit evidence, right? And so that's another element there, is that getting that information and getting that data and then doing something with it, right? The other part of it is kind of that middle part. So we have our client data. We have our data from the information that we have from our client that they give us as support items. We have all of their data, right? We want to be able to match that up, right? And there's two parts to that. There's sort of the current way that we can do it right now in terms of the Trillian perspective here, and then kind of what we want to do. And the first one is we want to be able to take that stuff in the cloud and match up all the stuff we already have there, right, with the data, the samples, and match them together. That's what you see here on the screen, and taking all of that stuff, directly integrating it from the Suralink portal, taking information potentially from Validus, other sources, bringing that in from the sample side of things, and then matching that up and taking that information, as Jordan will go through, and showing how we can actually integrate those, right? That's critical. And to think about, kind of how we talked about this and discussed as kind of, you talked about peeling back, I was thinking of Shrek peeling back the onion, right? But from the Trillian side of things there, right? When we talked about this, just the integration of the data from Suralink alone potentially sold the product itself, right? Because there's so much value in each individual integration that when you talk, that's what I mean about this stuff, is that the integrations are sometimes even more valuable than the individual products, because of the amount of time that's wasted in auditing and just moving stuff around, right? So now we can take our test evidence, we can match it up directly, we can take our information and we can download and get the support, and we can keep it there. We can keep it in the cloud, we can integrate it into something further, right? And so that's the element there. And then going forward, as many of you might be aware or potentially not, a really top, item that's very well discussed right now is being able to do direct matching of like bank statements out there, taking third-party support documents and matching them up with transactional detail, right? Doing that as a pre-match and then evaluating information after the fact, rather than just pulling samples. I believe you heard Jeff say that up front, right? Rather than just running samples all the time, we don't have to just run samples. We can do better than that, right? And that's what I mean, in terms of going forward. So we're looking at what we can do now and what we can do in the future.
Maybe that's where we get into when we start to look at the crystal ball and we end this thing with some predictions of where this is going. But I'm going to pass it over to Jordan now to bring this to life and to show everything. I think the last part of this is, you have your test evidence coming in, your unstructured data, your PDFs, you have your sample. from Validus with your structured data. And then I think there's a future iteration of this where your resulting work paper from Trillian gets then sent to whatever system you have managing your work papers. Well, let's. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Jordan. I'm going to give you 6 minutes to run through a whirlwind demo, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'll do my best here. Thanks, Scott. Just confirm you can see the screen. Beautiful. Okay. So to get into Kevin's example here, we have our data match module in Trillian, and one of the procedures that could be performed are those tests of details, those revenue tests, those expense tests, job cost, payroll, where you have at the moment, a number of different sample items with your supporting evidence in the form of a PDF, Word, et cetera, where you have to manually spend time matching up the transactional data set with the supporting documents. This is where these integrations come into play to automate that process. We have point solution A in Validus that once we've made our connection can feed us the transactional cleansed data set. And as we mentioned right now, Jeff said it before, Kevin said it, that might be in the form of a sample right now, a smaller data set. There's nothing to say that in the future that can't be thousands of line items that you're going to eventually try to match to point solution B, Suralink, in the form of the PDF audit evidence, those invoices, those check copies, those bank statements that support the transactions. So in this instance, I've made connections into a firm's Validus instance where they're pulling the data from, and their Suralink instance where they're pulling the documentation from. If I go to my next tab here, this is where in Trillian, I would actually create a unique workbook where I will pull in the transactional data set directly from Validus in this instance. I'll name the workbook. I'll select the specific engagement mapped to Validus' structure where the data will be pulled from, and I'll select the financial period of general ledger, sub-ledger detail that has already been cleansed that I want to bring forward here. Whether that's a month or whether that's a year's worth of transactions that could all be brought forth. So once I've brought in the transactional data set from Validus, the other end is the supporting documentation here, which can be brought in directly from Suralink. And again, in this instance, that will be your evidence, your PDF invoices, your bank statements, your check copies, et cetera. By clicking add folder here, import folder from Suralink, we've mapped to their hierarchy and their structure to be able to bring in specific request level, department level data versus having to individually download all those files and either go through them manually or to upload them back into another system here. We're integrated in that sense. So we have our 2 point, our 2 data points. Where does Trillian come in? We are facilitating that match. We're providing the automation to bridge the transactional data with the supporting document, via AI and via logic build and automation. And our next step here will be bridging that gap. It's saying which fields from my transactional data set do I want to match to which document types coming in from Suralink in this instance. And I have the ability to build via manual clicks here or via AI up top, Gen AI, typing in custom prompts to actually build the test that I'm looking for to make the match between the data set and the documents here. And once I've generated that workflow, and that is repeatable and can be utilized across different clients, I think it was Jeff that brought up Sally before, same as last year, over and over across years, that logic build and that test that you are facilitating will be saved in the backend of the system and can be shared across all of your clients. And the eventual end goal will be, or the eventual end result will be this, in which you have your data set, you have all the matches that will look to be made, and upon pressing our execute button here, the system will scan through all of the files that have been brought in from Suralink to search individually for these attributes over here. In this instance, we have a transaction date, we have the value of each transaction, and we have the specific invoice in which those details were featured. And a Trillian MO here are these green flags. Each time we have found a green flag, I could click on green flag and the actual file will be brought up. on the right-hand side of the screen, and it will highlight the specific attribute or attributes in which we found here. This is a very simple logic build. We can get more complex in allowing for materiality. We could pull information. We could leverage LLMs to generate this logic. I can say I need to match my date, my amount, and my transaction ID in order to not have an exception here. The logic build can be as simplistic or as advanced as you like, depending on the user base here. But that is kind of at the end-to-end process here in how we can eliminate the need to go through and control F through each individual file, searching for specific attributes in order to prove existence or to ensure that a job cost was up to the right amount or threshold to pass the test and to not have an exception here. And this is just the start of it. This is one way in which the three of us are kind of integrating together. I hope I didn't blow past my time here, but eventually, once this is complete, the idea is that this output will result in an end result, work paper, and we are skipping those, tedious and repeatable tasks of sifting through files. And to kind of bring it to a close here, this sample data set was 50 line items here, and a lot of times a sample will be 25. I think back to the theme in which we're all discussing with technology, such as this, in which preparers are being turned into reviewers, essentially. There's no reason why this can't be a continuous process, and we can allow for much larger, data sets versus the basic 25 that is status quo in the industry today. Kevin, if you want to chime in with anything, or anyone on the Validus side, and if not, then Scott, I know we're about 5 minutes from time here.
You did pretty well. I think you went on 7 minutes. Which is impressive. Not bad, given everything that you're showing. So this was super high level. Of course, we can follow up and do deeper dive sessions on with whoever needs on the breadth of that. I'm actually gonna pause on the look ahead, which is where we wanted to end this, because we do have a few questions that came in, and I want to be able to answer those questions. So I'm gonna go from the most recent to the first one. The most recent one was about the demo, which maybe it's a question for Jordan. How would this function if the documents in Suralink are scanned invoices with amounts and dates located in various places?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of this. The data does not have to be completely clean here. Our OCR is trained on hundreds of thousands of files at this point. So if it is handwritten, if it's a scanned in file, the system could pick up on it. And B, the second beauty of it is you saw a pretty standard invoice there. The idea is we're trying to get you, we're not focusing on homogeneous files. They don't all have to look alike here, so long as they contain similar pieces of information, and we have some sort of data point where we could bridge that Validus data back to the Suralink files.
Yep. Okay, amazing. The next question I think was for Kevin, which is what system do you house your work papers in? What cloud-based system are you using?
For Baker Tilly, primarily Caseware and Caseware Cloud. Other vendors, if you're interested, if you're in the other cloud-based ones that are in the same space. Thomson Reuters has a product. They have the advanced flow. A lot of users use that. They're working towards a cloud-based product there. Inflow would be another example there. But for us, we're gearing towards a Caseware Cloud integration.
Yep, and I guess that feeds on to the next question that came from Leander, which is, are there any plans for Trullian to partner with end-to-end solutions like DAS or other solutions? Great question. The only thing I'd say there is stay tuned. It's definitely in the works conversation. I think there's a real opportunity in this space that best in breed and sort of end to end don't have to be this mutually exclusive thing. And some of the more forward-looking and innovative end-to-end solutions are going to give you a chance to, buy bits and pieces of their platform as well as integrate best-in-breed solutions with their platform. I know we see that with Validus integrated into DAS as well. So, okay, I'm just trying to run through, given we have 1 minute. Given a customer in a current contract, but still using old technology, how do you all best see increasing adoption of the future tech stack? I don't know if anybody wants to take that one.
I think you have to make it easy for people. We're in a world where convenience is everything. I mean, what Jordan did in a few minutes there, 5 years ago didn't exist. 3 years ago, it's still taking you, a couple hours to do, and we did it in a matter of minutes. You've got to be willing within the firm to seek outside of your comfort zone, your box, and look at these tools as being ongoing. We're going to see this pace of change continue, and we're excited about it. And not only continue, but go at a faster pace. You'll see more new things coming out quicker than we've seen in the past.
And that's why,
We
as,
have
as I had mentioned that, I know it's that time, but I think it's important just to reiterate that fact, is that's why it's important to think about, the vendors that you choose, not only what they are, but how well they innovate, how well they integrate, and where they're going, right? Hence this name of this slide. It's critical to think about that rather than just where they are. So Scott, what were you going to say?
with the last one, I know there's a couple that we weren't able to answer. I'm sorry. We can follow up with you all, but the last one, which I think is really important, maybe it's for Kevin, which is how do you get auditors to shift from doing work in Excel to doing work in a cloud platform?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have time to talk about that in 0 minutes, right? But the answer to that question is, and it kind of goes back to the previous question, which is you need to provide them real examples. You need to give them you need to show them, right? Rather than just tell them to go do it, you need to show them, here's how it can be done. And the more you can show an auditor that this is what you do and this is what you get a much better result than if you just say, we're going to go use a new thing today, right? The chances that they pick that up are not so high, right? The chances that you show them something interesting and show them the few key things that you have on there and they might do that, much higher, right? I'm not saying auditors are quick movers, but that is one of the ways that we try and make that happen.
Amazing. All right, you put a fine point on it. On behalf of Trillian, Validus, Suralink, our friends at Baker Tilly, guys, I really enjoyed the conversation. I had a lot of fun. Let's do it again sometime. And for anybody that's on the line that wants to learn more, we'll be following up with the recording shortly after this. Thank you for being here. Someone asked, we did record the presentation. We'll send it out. So thanks. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.